Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into micromanagement.
Ooh,
I bet most of us have experienced this at some point in
definitely.
our careers.
Yeah,
And we're not just talking about like a boss who checks in a little too often,
yeah.
This is a whole management style
It really is.
with serious consequences for teams and individuals.
Absolutely.
So to help us break this down today, we have an expert
Huh?
who can provide us with some great insights into this topic.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to go beyond just like the surface level stuff today.
Yeah.
We're going to explore what really makes a micromanager tick,
Yeah, that's right.
how to spot those telltale behaviors,
Mm-hmm.
and how to deal with this kind of management style effectively.
Yes,
We'll be looking at real strategies for both employees
for sure.
and managers.
Definitely.
So whether you're on the receiving end or you're worried that you might be the one doing the micromanaging,
Yeah.
understanding this is crucial for building a healthier and more productive work environment.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Good.
What exactly are we talking about when we say micromanagement?
That's a great question.
Is it just about a boss being overly involved?
I mean, that's part of it.
Or is there something more to it?
Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced than just a boss looking over your shoulder,
Right.
Think of it this way. Micromanagement is rooted in a lack of trust in a team's abilities.
Okay.
It's about needing to control every single detail, constantly second-guessing decisions,
Oh.
and just creating an atmosphere where people feel like they can't breathe without permission.
Yeah.
It's not about guidance, it's about control.
So it's not just the actions,
Yeah.
it's the underlying feeling of being stifled and doubted
Exactly.
that really defines micromanagement.
Yes, it's the difference between a manager offering, helpful feedback
Yeah.
and a micromanager who's dissecting every email,
Mhm.
attending every meeting, no matter how small.
And requesting constant updates even when things are clearly on track.
Wow.
That kind of behavior sends a clear message.
What's that?
I don't trust you to do this right.
And that can be pretty demoralizing, especially over time.
Absolutely. Studies show that micromanagement is incredibly common.
Really?
Almost 60% of people have experienced it.
Wow.
And the impact is significant.
Like what kind of impact are we talking?
We're talking decreased morale,
Okay.
hindered productivity, and
Wow.
even high turnover rates.
60%. That's a lot of people.
It is.
But why is it so prevalent?
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive.
Right.
If micromanaging actually harms productivity and
Yeah.
drives people away, why do so many managers do it?
That's a great question, and there isn't a single easy answer.
Okay.
Some experts believe it's linked to certain personality types,
Okay.
the perfectionist,
Yeah.
the control freak, or even like the insecure boss who feels threatened
Right.
by their team's competence. Others point to systemic issues like poor management training
Okay.
or a culture that prioritizes short-term results over employee well-being.
So it's not just about individual managers.
Oh,
There might be deeper organizational and cultural influences at play as well.
right. And that's why it's so important to understand this,
Yeah.
not just for employees who are dealing with it directly, but for organizations as a whole.
Because if we can identify those root causes, we can start addressing the problem at its source.
Exactly. Now, before we dive into strategies for dealing with micromanagement,
Okay.
let's talk about how to actually recognize it.
Yeah. How do you recognize it?
It's not always as obvious as you might think.
So what are some of the telltale signs that you might be dealing with a micromanager?
Well, it often starts with an overwhelming need
Okay.
for constant updates and approvals.
Huh.
This can look like being CC'd on every email,
Yeah.
even those irrelevant to the manager,
Okay.
having to attend pointless meetings, or being bombarded with requests for status reports on even the smallest tasks.
So basically, if your manager seems more interested in monitoring your every move
Yes,
than in actually helping you succeed,
exactly.
that's a red flag.
Right. Another sign is a difficulty delegating tasks effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Micromanagers often hoard responsibilities even for things that could be easily handled by other team members.
It's like they don't trust anyone else to do it their way,
Yes.
even if it ultimately slows down the entire project.
Exactly. And then there's the overemphasis on minor details at the expense of the bigger picture.
The classic can't see the forest for the trees scenario.
Yes. They might get get so fixated on one tiny aspect
Yeah.
that they lose sight of the overall goals,
Yeah.
causing delays and frustration for everyone involved.
Okay, so we've got the constant need for updates, the inability to delegate,
Yes.
and the obsession with minute details.
Right.
But is it really micromanagement if it's just one of these things,
It's a good point.
or does it have to be all of them?
These signs can manifest in different ways and to varying degrees.
Okay.
The key is to look for patterns, not just isolated incidents.
So if you're consistently feeling stifled,
Yes.
controlled, and like your judgment isn't trusted,
Right.
that's a pretty strong indicator that you might be dealing with a micromanager,
Exactly.
even if they don't check every single box on the list.
And once you've recognized those patterns,
Yeah.
you can start to think strategically about how to navigate this situation.
Which brings us to our next big question.
Yes.
What can you actually do about micromanagement?
Great question.
Stay tuned, because after a quick...
Wait, before we move on,
Okay.
there's one more critical point I want to emphasize about recognizing micromanagement.
Absolutely. What's that?
Sometimes micromanagement can be subtle,
Correct.
even disguised as helpfulness.
Oh.
A manager might constantly offer to take tasks off your plate
Wow.
or suggest specific ways to approach a problem. It might seem like they're just trying to be supportive,
Yeah.
but it can actually be a way of subtly exerting control and undermining your confidence.
So how can you tell the difference between genuine support and disguised micromanagement?
It's about paying attention to how you feel.
Okay.
Do you feel empowered and trusted, or do you feel like your decisions are constantly being second-guessed
Right.
and your autonomy is being eroded?
That's such an important distinction.
It is.
And it really highlights the emotional impact of micromanagement,
Yes.
which I think is often overlooked.
Absolutely. It's not just about the work itself, it's about how that work makes you feel.
Right.
And if you're consistently feeling stressed,
Yeah.
anxious, or demoralized,
Yeah.
it's worth taking a closer look at the dynamics at play.
Okay, so we've talked about what micromanagement is, why it's so prevalent,
Yeah.
and how to recognize those subtle signs.
Right.
Now let's finally dive into those strategies for dealing with it.
Because knowledge is power.
Yes.
And once you understand the dynamics, you can start to take control of the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, because we're about to get into some practical advice for both employees and managers.
It's going to be good.
I can't wait. All right, we've set the stage. We know what micromanagement looks like and why it's so pervasive.
Right.
Now let's get to the good stuff.
Yes.
What can you do about it?
Let's empower our listeners with some actionable strategies.
Okay.
We'll start with advice for employees,
Okay.
since they often bear the brunt of micromanagement.
It can feel overwhelming, right? Like, how do you change someone's ingrained management style?
It's a challenge, no doubt,
Yeah.
but not impossible.
Okay.
And it doesn't always require a head-on confrontation.
Okay.
Sometimes subtle shifts in your approach can make a world of difference.
So where do you even begin?
One of the most effective yet often overlooked strategies is to become a master of documentation.
Interesting. I wouldn't have immediately thought of that. Can you elaborate?
Think about it. Micromanagers often stem from a place of anxiety and lack of control.
Okay.
If you proactively document your decisions,
Yeah.
your rationale, your progress, you're essentially giving them that visibility they crave,
Okay.
but in a way that empowers you.
It takes away their need to constantly check in because the information is already there,
Exactly.
transparently laid out. I like it.
And this can be as simple as detailed meeting notes,
Okay.
shared project trackers,
Uh-huh.
or even just composing emails in a way that preemptively answers potential questions.
So you're anticipating their concerns
Right.
and addressing them head on,
Yes.
which hopefully reduces their need to micromanage in the first place.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, alongside documentation,
Yeah.
another powerful tool is setting clear boundaries,
Okay.
which I know can feel intimidating with a micromanager.
For sure. It's
Yeah.
like, how do you establish boundaries when they seem determined to overstep them at every turn?
It's all about communication
Right.
and consistency.
For example, if they're notorious for bombarding you with emails after hours,
Right.
establish a clear expectation that you'll respond to work messages only during work hours.
So you're not outright refusing to engage.
Right.
You're setting reasonable parameters for when and how you're available.
Right. Or if they insist on being CC on every email,
Oh, yeah.
propose a weekly digest instead. You're still keeping them informed, but on your terms, which helps regain a sense of control over your workflow.
These are such practical tips,
Yeah.
and I love that they focus on being assertive without being confrontational.
Exactly. You're not trying to change their personality.
Right.
You're changing the dynamics of the interaction.
Okay.
And remember, consistency is key.
Yes.
The more you stick to these boundaries, the more likely they are to be respected.
Okay, so we've got documentation and boundaries.
Yes.
What else can employees do to manage a micromanager?
Well, sometimes you need to address the issue head on.
Okay.
And that's where learning how to have those difficult conversations comes in. Ugh. I think most people would rather do just about anything than confront their boss.
I know, it's hard.
Yeah.
Any tips for making this a bit less terrifying? First, remember that you have a right to a respectful and productive work environment.
Okay.
You're not being demanding.
Right.
You're advocating for your well-being and your ability to do your job effectively.
So it's about framing it as a shared problem, not a personal attack.
Yes. Focus on the impact their behavior is having on your work,
Okay.
not their personality or intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Use I statements.
Okay.
Like, I'm finding it difficult to focus when I'm constantly being interrupted.
Right.
Or I feel like my judgment isn't trusted when you constantly second-guess my decisions.
So you're taking ownership of your experience
Yes.
and explaining how their actions are affecting you without blaming or accusing.
And it's crucial to come prepared with specific examples.
Okay.
And if possible, potential solutions.
Okay.
You're showing them that you're not just complaining.
Right.
You're actively trying to find a way to work better together.
So instead of saying, you micromanage me too much,
Right.
you might say,
Exactly.
I'm finding it difficult to make progress on Project X because I need to get your approval on every single step.
Right.
Could we perhaps agree on a set of milestones where I check in with you for feedback?
Exactly. You're being proactive and solution-oriented,
Okay.
which can go a long way in turning a potentially contentious conversation into a constructive one.
These are such great strategies for employees.
Mm-hmm.
But let's shift gears now and talk about what managers can do to avoid micromanaging in the first place.
Okay.
Because self-awareness is key here, right?
Yeah.
You have to be able to recognize those tendencies in yourself
Absolutely.
before you can start changing your behavior.
And sometimes it's not as obvious as you might think.
Okay.
Many micromanagers truly believe they're just being helpful or detail-oriented.
So if you're a manager and you're listening to this thinking,
right.
wait a minute, do I micromanage?
Yeah.
What are some signs to look out for?
Well, ask yourself, do you find yourself constantly questioning your team's decisions, even when they've proven themselves to be competent?
Or feeling the need to control every aspect of their work,
Exactly.
even the minor details.
Do you struggle to delegate tasks effectively, even for things that could be easily handled by others?
Okay.
Or do you feel anxious when you don't have constant visibility into what your team is doing?
If any of these ring true,
Yeah.
there's a chance you might be slipping into micromanagement territory.
Right, and acknowledging that is the first step towards change.
Okay.
Now, once you've recognized those tendencies in yourself,
Okay.
how do you actually stop micromanaging?
Okay, let's get into those strategies for managers.
Right.
Where do they begin?
Well, it all starts with shifting your mindset
Okay.
from control to empowerment.
Okay.
Remember, you hired these people for a reason.
Right.
Trust their expertise, their judgment, and their ability to get the job done.
So step one is to take a deep breath and remind yourself that you don't have to be in control of everything.
And this leads nicely into the next strategy.
Okay, what's that?
Delegate effectively.
Okay.
Clearly define roles,
Right.
responsibilities, and desired outcomes.
Okay.
But then step back and give your team the autonomy to figure out the how.
Because sometimes it's the journey,
Right.
not just the destination,
Exactly.
that leads to the most growth and learning.
And resist the urge to jump in and fix things the moment you see a potential problem.
Now that's hard.
It is allow your team to make mistakes
Okay.
and learn from them.
Okay.
That's how they develop their skills and become more independent.
It's about creating a safe space for experimentation and growth.
Yes.
Not a pressure cooker where every misstep is scrutinized.
Now, one thing we often overlook when discussing micromanagement
Okay.
is the importance of timing when it comes to offering help.
Hmm.
There's a fine line between being a supportive manager and a micromanager, and it often boils down to recognizing when your team actually needs help
Right.
and when they just need space to figure things out.
So what's the key to finding that balance?
Observe,
Okay.
listen,
Uh-huh.
and resist the urge to preempt every problem.
So instead of immediately offering solutions,
Yes.
ask questions that guide their thinking.
Exactly.
Like, say things like, What are your thoughts on this? Or what options have you considered?
You're encouraging them to problem solve independently without dictating the answer.
And when you do offer help,
yes,
frame it as collaboration.
Exactly.
Not correction.
Instead of saying, you should do it this way,
Yeah.
try, have you considered this approach? Or what resources might be helpful in tackling this challenge?
You're empowering them to find their own solutions,
Right.
which builds confidence and fosters a sense of ownership over their work.
And this brings us to another crucial aspect of avoiding micromanagement.
What else?
Providing feedback that focuses on growth and development,
Okay.
not criticism.
Because the goal isn't to point out every little flaw.
Yeah.
It's to help your team learn and improve.
Exactly. And this starts with recognizing and celebrating their successes,
Okay.
no matter how small.
Right.
A simple, great job on that report,
Yeah.
or I really appreciate how you handled that difficult client
Mm-hmm.
can go a long way in building trust and confidence.
It's about creating a positive feedback loop
Yes.
where they feel seen and valued for their contributions.
And when it comes to areas for improvement,
Okay.
frame your feedback as constructive suggestions,
Okay.
not directives. Instead of saying, you need to do this differently,
Yeah.
have you considered this approach? I think it could be more effective because...
You're offering guidance and perspective
Right.
without dictating their every move.
And remember to actively listen to their perspective. They
Yeah.
may have insights or ideas that you haven't considered.
It's about creating a two-way dialogue, not a one-way lecture.
Now, if you're genuinely concerned about your team's competence or skill level,
Yeah.
investing in training and development programs can be a great way to address those concerns
Wow.
while simultaneously empowering your team to grow.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
You get a more skilled team, and they get the opportunity to learn and advance their careers.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of simply expressing your trust in your team.
Yeah.
Let them know that you believe in their abilities and that you're there to support them, not to micromanage them.
Sometimes just knowing that your manager has your back can make a world of difference.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that breaking free from micromanagement is a journey,
Okay.
not a destination.
Right.
It takes time, effort, and a willingness to challenge your own assumptions.
It's about constantly evaluating your behavior, seeking feedback from your team,
Yes.
and making adjustments along the way.
And the payoff is huge.
What's that?
When managers shift their focus from control to empowerment, they often find that their teams become more productive,
Okay.
more engaged, and more innovative.
Because they're finally free to tap into their full potential.
Exactly. And that ultimately benefits everyone.
Right.
Now, before we move on to our final thoughts and takeaways,
Yeah.
let's address one more crucial aspect of dealing with micromanagement,
Okay.
whether you're an employee or a manager.
Okay. What is it?
It's about recognizing that sometimes, despite your best efforts,
Yeah.
you might find yourself in a situation where the micromanagement is so pervasive,
Right.
so ingrained in the culture,
Yeah.
that it's simply impossible to change.
That's a tough reality to face.
It is.
But I think it's important to acknowledge.
Yes, Lulu.
You can't force someone to change if they're not willing to.
Right. And in those situations, it's crucial to prioritize your own well-being and career goals.
Okay.
You deserve to work in an environment where you feel valued, trusted, and empowered to do your best work.
So sometimes the best strategy is to recognize when it's time to move on, to find a better fit.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you failed.
Right.
It means you're prioritizing your own growth and happiness.
That's such an important message.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
We've talked about recognizing micromanagement strategies for both employees and managers.
Yes.
And even the difficult decision of when it might be time to walk away.
Right.
Now let's take a step back and connect all of this to the bigger picture.
Okay.
What does it tell us about the true cost of micromanagement?
That's a good question.
Because we've hinted at the negative impacts, but let's really dive into why this is such a detrimental management style.
Yes.
What are we sacrificing when we choose control over empowerment? Stay tuned, because that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive. So we've talked about how to spot micromanagement and some really practical ways to deal with it. But now I'm curious, what's the bigger picture here?
Yeah.
Why is this such a detrimental management style?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it goes way beyond just dips in productivity or a few unhappy employees.
Okay.
We're talking about a ripple effect that impacts creativity, innovation,
Wow.
and even the overall culture of an organization.
Let's break that down.
Okay.
How does micromanagement stifle creativity?
Imagine you're an artist
Okay.
with a micromanager constantly looking over your shoulder,
Yeah.
critiquing every brushstroke before you've even finished the painting.
Oh, gosh.
What happens to your creative flow?
It gets choked.
Right.
You start second-guessing yourself.
Exactly.
Playing it safe, worry about pleasing the micromanager instead of exploring new ideas.
It's like planting a seed in a pot that's too small. You might get some growth,
Okay.
but it'll never reach its full potential.
Right.
Micromanagement creates this atmosphere of fear and conformity, where people hesitate to take risks, propose new ideas, or think outside the box.
Because the focus shifts from innovation to simply avoiding mistakes,
Yes,
which is a recipe for stagnation.
right. And this has huge implications for problem solving as well.
Okay, so,
When employees are constantly being told what to do and how to do it,
yeah.
they lose the ability to think critically and independently. They become reliant on the micromanager for every decision,
Oh, wow.
which slows down progress and stifles their development.
It creates this vicious cycle where the micromanager is doing more and more,
Exactly.
while the team is doing less and less,
Right.
leading to burnout for the manager and stunted growth for the employees.
Precisely. And on an organizational level, this can be disastrous.
Right.
We live in a world that demands adaptability and innovation.
For sure.
Companies that can't think creatively, problem solve effectively,
Yeah.
and adapt to new challenges quickly get left behind.
So micromanagement isn't just bad for morale.
No,
It's actually bad for business. It's a competitive disadvantage in today's fast-paced market.
absolutely. And then there's the impact on company culture,
Okay.
which can be insidious and long-lasting. When micromanagement is pervasive, it creates an environment of distrust and anxiety.
Oh, God.
People become afraid to speak up, to share their ideas,
Right.
or to challenge the status quo.
So even if the company is outwardly successful,
Yeah.
it's built on a shaky foundation of fear and resentment,
Right.
which is never sustainable in the long run.
And let's not forget about the impact on the micromanagers themselves.
Right.
They might think they're being helpful
Yeah.
or doing what's best for the team, but they're often overworked,
Exactly.
stressed,
Yeah.
and ultimately less effective than they could be.
It's like they're trapped in this self-made prison of control.
Exactly.
Unable to
And-
see the bigger picture or to trust the very people they hired.
So it's really a lose-lose situation for everyone involved.
It sounds like it.
And that brings us back to why this deep dive is so important. Okay. Recognizing the true cost of micromanagement beyond just those immediate frustrations
Right.
is the first step toward creating a more positive and productive work environment.
And ultimately, it's about choosing empowerment over control.
It is.
It's about trusting your team, fostering their development, and creating a culture where everyone feels valued,
Absolutely.
respected, and inspired
Yeah.
to do their best work.
Because when people feel empowered,
Yeah.
they don't just meet expectations,
Right.
they exceed them.
Okay.
They come up with those game-changing ideas,
Yeah.
they solve problems creatively, and they build a company that's not just successful,
Yeah.
but truly thriving.
And that's a future worth striving for.
Well said. And on that note,
Yeah.
I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this deep dive into micromanagement.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from recognizing those subtle signs to exploring those far-reaching consequences, and most importantly, equipping you with actionable strategies
Yeah.
for navigating these tricky situations.
Yeah. Remember, whether you're an employee dealing with a micromanager or a manager who's recognized those tendencies in yourself, the first step is awareness.
Okay.
Once you understand the dynamics at play,
Yeah.
you can start making conscious choices that lead to a healthier and more productive work environment for everyone.
And don't forget, even small changes can make a big difference.
They can.
So take those first steps.
Yes.
Have those conversations, set those boundaries,
Right.
and remember, you deserve to work in a place where you feel valued,
Absolutely.
trusted, and empowered to do your best work.
Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.